My name is Harrison McLean. I am a junior at Gonzaga University. This is for a class called Organizing Programming Languages, otherwise known as OPL. And what I am doing is I am introducing break and continue statements into my MyPL programming language. So, what is the purpose of this extension? The purpose of the extension is to add break and continue statements to be able to be used in MyPL in loops. What this would add to MyPL is users would have better loop control. By better loop control, I mean users would be able to immediately terminate loops using break, or they could skip iterations in a loop using continue. Not only does this provide the user better loop control, but break and continue simplify loop logic and complexity for a lot of functions that without break and continue or algorithms would be a lot more complicated. And then break and continue can also be used for debugging. You could, for example, put a break in a while loop to break if it hits a certain value, and then you know it is hitting that value for debugging purposes. So, what are the rules of break and continue? So, break and continue can both only be used in loops, which would be a for loop or a while loop. Break and continue are usable in if statements only if that its if statement is in a loop, and those break and continue statements only apply to that loop that it is in. And then what break does is it ends and exits the loop right where the break is. It immediately ends there and exits out of the loop. And then continue goes back to the beginning of the loop for the next iteration. It skips everything that's underneath it and just starts uh, the loop again for the next iteration. All right, so what I added to the Lexer, this is the first part that I changed, was as you can see in reserved words, I added 2 new reserved words for continue and break, and then they also have their matching token types as well. A very simple change. To test my Lexer, I actually made some unit tests. There's more than this one. What we have here is another test. This is a example file. So it's a for loop that prints out, it skips the odd numbers but prints out even numbers from a certain range to a certain range. And this, I know this passes correctly because it spits out the correct token stream when I run it. And here's an example of my test running. So we have homework 1, which is the Lexer. All the tests passed correctly, and here's the Lexer. The next part I worked on was a simple parser. As you can see, I added break and continue recognition for those token types into the statements function. So what this does, if it sees a continue token type or a break token type, it'll call that matching function. And what the function does, it just skips past that token and then uh, expects a semicolon after, excuse me. So to test my simple parser, what I did is I made some unit tests, and these unit tests just have, simple while statements that have a break and continue inside, and then here's some for loops with break and continue, just making sure that this type of syntax passes. Added another example to the test file of break and continue to make sure that passes. It does. Here's my simple parser, and here's proof that homework 2, all the unit tests pass. Next, I worked on the AST parser. So what I changed for the AST parser is that if there is I first added continue statement node and break statement node to the data classes, the AST data classes. So, and these are very simple data classes. It's just a pass with its own accept function. So what this does is that if you encounter a token type continue or a break token type, what it'll do is it'll make that node and then append and then actually put that node through the continue statement function or the break statement function. It'll just advance past it, and then it'll attach the continue statement or the break statement node to the statements of, let's say, like an if statement, a for, or if an if statement, a for loop, or a while loop. And then to test that, what I did was I made some unit tests. These unit tests make sure that there's something in statements. So as you can see, this is the only thing. The only thing in the if statement is the break, and that would be this one statement in the if part of if statements. And that test passes, so I know that it's adding it correctly. And then I made a file, an example file with just some similar, basic continue and break statement functions. They would use them, and those pass as well. I can show that right here. Those pass, and then onto the semantic checker. So what I did the semantic checker is I actually added a global variable called in loop, and initially in loop is set to false, and the program will keep track of what in loop is set to throughout, and it will change. So in loop is actually set to true if you're in a loop. At the beginning of a for loop or a while loop, in loop will be set to true, and then at the end of the for loop or the while loop, it'll be set again to false. And this is important because in, for example, an if statement that is in a while loop, you would need in loop to be set to true, and this is what this checks right here. So it's saying if the if has a statement that's a break statement or continue statement, check if the in loop flag is false, and if it is false, that means you're not in a loop, obviously, and which would be an error. You can't use break or continue outside of a loop. And these checks are actually not needed in the while loop, the visit while loop function, and the visit for loop function, because at the beginning of the function, in loop is set to true, so we obviously know that it's true. And then at the end, it's set back to false. So what I did to check the semantic checker is, again, I made some unit tests of, I made a positive and negative unit tests of, for example, this is an if statement that is not in a loop, and it's trying to use a continue statement, which would be an error. This test passes, and then here's another test I made. It is a if statement that is in a for loop using a continue, which is valid. And then again, I have some test files. These test files are just, again, using continue and break statements, making sure those pass. And here is that part passing. I could bring it up here, the semantic checker if statement right here. And then so for the VM, so I had no changes to the VM. My initial thoughts were I was going to, for the code generator, I was going to use jumps to implement the break and continue. So I didn't really need to change anything in the VM, nothing needed to be added. So the code generator. Unfortunately, I did not complete the code generator in time. I had issues with understanding how to get the correct index to jump to, because basically when you hit a break statement, you need to jump to the end of that function or the end of the loop. And I was having trouble trying to implement that. And then a continue, you need to jump back to the beginning of the loop, which was also giving me a bit of trouble. I did talk to Dr. Bowers, and he recommended implementing a symbol table type um, function with it, or a symbol table for break and continue, basically to map out what the program needs. But unfortunately, I my attempt at this was not successful, and I was not able to complete the code generator. I did have some code generator testing ready. I had unit tests, but I was not, obviously, as I stated, I was not able to complete the code generator. But I did have tests in place for when it is completed. So a summary of my project: break and continue are implemented in the Lexer, the simple parser, the AST parser, the semantic checker, and I also uh, in the VM, I guess, as well. The part that I didn't complete, which was one part, is the code generation implementation was not finished. Overall, I would call this project a semi success. It is incomplete, but I did complete most of the parts that were required. And then again, I guess a positive point is all the tests I created and example files do pass. So, conclusion, for future plans, I would definitely like to get the code generator working correctly to fully to complete my project. I would probably need some more guidance to be able to do that. I'm still a bit fuzzy on how uh, the symbol table is meant to be implemented for break and continue. But overall, my project went pretty smoothly and was mostly successful until I had a roadblock on the code generator. And if I had another week on my project, I feel like maybe I could fully complete it with some guidance, of course. And thank you. That concludes my project. Have a great day.